Okay, everybody, my name is Jason Parker. Thank you for being here. I want to pull up our agenda for this meeting and to let you know what it is we're going to be focusing on. So today is Social Security timing and strategies. We're going to be talking about when to claim Social Security as part of a retirement cash flow plan, how you can know if you have saved enough for retirement, learn why retirement is all about cash flow and not your net worth, consider some of the tax implications of your planning, understand how to put all of the pieces of a retirement puzzle together so that you can have the greatest sense of confidence as you're making this transition into retirement, and then stress test your plan against some of the different things you need to be thinking about, such as stock market risk, sequence of return, inflation, death of one spouse, long-term care, and some of those items. And let me pull my presentation back up here. So a couple of disclaimers. First of all, we're going to be talking about Social Security. We're not endorsed by the Social Security Administration. What we're trying to do is share with you good information from a retirement planning standpoint. And obviously a good part of a retirement plan is Social Security. So this is not specific information for anybody on this program today. Obviously, I don't know your specific situation, so I can't give you individualized and personalized advice unless we speak. And so I ask that you don't leave the webinar today and go implement anything without talking to somebody to give you proper advice on things like investments, tax planning, when to start Social Security. This should all be done in the context of an overall plan, and really you don't want to take any of these different ideas independent from one another. As many of you know, Sound Retirement Planning is my book. Sound Retirement Radio is the radio show that I've been doing now for 8+ years, and it's also available as a podcast. So there's a lot of different touch points out there. To hire us to actually work for you as a financial advisor, the name of my firm is Parker Financial, and we do work with individuals to help them create what I like to think of as a sound retirement plan. Okay, so here are all of the components that I think make up a good sound retirement plan. Number one, you need to have a budget. Number two, you want to optimize your Social Security, which is where we're going to spend a lot of time today. Number three, you want to design a year-by-year cash flow plan. You want to take and stress test that plan against things like inflation, the death of one spouse, long-term care, sequence of returns, investment risk, tax risk. And then once you create a year-by-year cash flow plan, then you want to create a structure that's going to help you diversify across time. I want to remind many of you, you may not know, some of you may, some of you may not, but we created some software called the Retirement Budget Calculator. The reason that I created the software, and it's a work in progress, it's available now and it's getting better all the time. I'm excited to be sharing with you that we have some enhancements coming out shortly. But the Retirement Budget Calculator, I found understanding your spending is one of the most important components of a good retirement cash flow plan. If you don't know where your money's going, it's impossible to be able to answer the question of have you saved enough. And it's also really hard for us to be able to answer the question of when should you start Social Security. So a budget and understanding your spending is one of the most important things you can do. We wanted to create a system, a software solution that allows you to save that budget so that you can come back and make revisions to it over time. That's the Retirement Budget Calculator. It is a tool that you have to pay to use. It's a one-time fee of $54 to have access to the Retirement Budget Calculator. One other item I want to draw to your attention, we're going to be, I am recording this webinar today, so if you're not able to stay for the entire thing, or you just want to go back and revisit it, we will make it available for a limited time to be able to go back and watch it. Also, if you have any friends that are going to be interested in maybe revisiting this material, we'll send you a link out so that you can forward it to them to watch the replay if they weren't able to be here for the live event. Sound Retirement Planning is the website where we archive all kinds of good information for you. Of course, the quick clicks section is just articles I'm reading every month that I want to share with you that I think are relevant to retirement planning. We have the radio show that's archived for your convenience, so you can go back and listen to all of the different podcasts. And then, of course, links to the Retirement Budget Calculator, webinar replays, understanding the Sound Retirement Planning Blueprint, and of course our Social Security calculator, which we'll talk about in more detail here in just a minute. So as we get going with Social Security, first of all, if you were born, and a lot of the people that we're working with today were born between 1943 and 1954. So for you, your full retirement age is 66. But remember, you can start your Social Security as early as age 62. However, if you do, you have to remember that there's a 25% permanent reduction for beginning your benefits early. And so if you have a history of longevity in your family, you may be shooting yourself in the foot. You know, we had this little image of somebody cutting Social Security envelope on the sign-up page for the webinar. You know, people are worried about the government cutting their benefits, when the reality is what you should be worried about is shooting yourself in the foot and cutting your own benefits because you're making decisions based on either fear or greed. And so some people think that because they believe that Social Security is not going to be there in the future, they just automatically take it as early as they can at age 62 without really giving any consideration to how that impacts the overall retirement cash flow plan. And so just remember, that's a 25% permanent reduction if you do that. The other thing is, in 2017, we have earnings limitation. So if you start Social Security early, if you earn more than $16,920 in 2017, Social Security's for every $2 you earn above that, they're going to take back $1 of benefits. So you really want to be careful about starting Social Security early at 62 if you're still working and you have good income. Sometimes I've seen people where they retire at 62, their employer calls them up and says, hey, I've got a great opportunity. I want you to come back. We're going to pay you $100,000 a year. And then, of course, at the same time, they think that Social Security is going to continue. A year later, they come to find out that there's not going to be any Social Security. And it just kind of, Social Security will go and recalculate the amount of income you're going to receive based on that higher year of earnings. But it can throw a wrench into people's planning if you're not prepared for that. So again, be careful with your earnings if you're going to retire before full retirement age. Again, if you were born between 1943 and 1954, full retirement age is 66. After 1954, depending on your birthday, full retirement age increases a little bit at a time. So for example, I was meeting with some folks recently and their full retirement age was 66 and 4 months. So it depends on when your birthday is. For somebody like me, my full retirement age is going to be age 67 before I can claim my full benefit. But for those born between 1943 and 1954, your full retirement age is 66. This is when you can earn as much income as you want, and you're not going to have to worry about any reductions. So there's no earnings limitation at that point. And it's also when you become eligible for your full retirement benefit without any reduction. So we don't have to worry about that 25% reduction anymore at age 66. The other magic number that you want to be thinking about is age 70. Age 70 is the latest that you would want to start taking Social Security. Most of you today understand that every year that you wait, actually every month that you wait beyond age 66, your Social Security actually increases. But on an annual basis, the deferred retirement credits are 8% per year. So every year that you wait to start taking Social Security, your benefit increases at 8% per year. So at age 70, you would receive 132% of what your benefit would have been. But remember, too, you're also eligible for those cost of living allowances during the years that you're in deferral. So it can actually end up being more than 132% if there are cost of living allowances that are being applied based on the Consumer Price Index. Now, one of the neat things that's still available to some of you, but it's been lost for others, are switch strategies. And those are going to, if you were born before January 1st, 1954, or at least one person, especially for, this is very important for married couples or widows, but if one of you was born before January 1st, 1954, you still have the access to be able to do what's called the restricted application. And the restricted application is important because remember, Social Security for married couples is made up of really 3 different pieces that we're trying to optimize. You have your own benefit based on your own earnings record. You have your spousal benefit based on your spouse's earnings record. And then you have your survivor benefit. And so what happens is, let's say Mr. and Mrs. Jones, we'll say Mr. Jones has a $2,000 a month benefit, Mrs. Jones has a $1,000 a month benefit. Combined, they have, as a married couple, they have $3,000 per month. The way the survivor benefit works, or the easiest way to think about it at least, is that when one spouse dies, the surviving spouse gets to step up to the higher of the two benefits. So as a married couple, they were receiving $3,000 per month, but let's say Mr. Jones dies. Mrs. Jones has a benefit of $1,000 a month. She gets to step up to that $2,000 a month benefit. So now without him in the picture, she's now receiving $2,000 a month instead of $3,000 a month. So when we're trying to understand the best way to optimize Social Security, and I really wish that I could give you just a cookie cutter answer here that says, hey, everybody should start Social Security at 62 or 66 or 70. But unfortunately, that's really not doing you any service, because you should make the decision on when to start Social Security in the context of an overall retirement cash flow plan. And there's a lot of different variables that we're going to be looking at here, but you want to look at your own benefit, your spousal benefit, and your survivor benefit, how to get all of those pieces working together to see how can you get the most money out of Social Security over two people's lifetimes, making some assumptions about life expectancy, making some assumptions about cost of living increases, and making some assumptions about how long the longest lived spouse is going to make it. And so unless we have all of those different data points, it's hard to really give good advice on when you should start Social Security. I talked about on Sound Retirement Planning, we have our Social Security calculator that you can use. One of the other ones that's good that I think is worth looking into, if you haven't already checked this out, is the AARP Social Security Benefits Calculator. Really great calculator, especially for married couples. You don't have to enter any personal information in to be able to use this tool. Just Google AARP Social Security Calculator, and you'll notice it brings up this dialog box here. It says Introduction. You can start now, Step 1, Step 2, Step 3, Step 4. And I would say that for the free calculators that are out there for people that are looking to try to figure out the best claiming strategy for Social Security, this should definitely be a starting point for you to help you understand how the rules work, and it will take into consideration things like your claiming strategies that are available to you. Okay, let's see. And we talked about the restricted application. So what the restricted application is, again, this isn't available to everybody. So back in 2015, Congress changed the rules. Up until that point, everybody was eligible for the restricted application, but now they've grandfathered people in that were born before that 1954 cutoff, the January 1st, 1954. And so what it says is, again, let's take that example. Mr. Jones has $2,000 a month. Mrs. Jones has $1,000 a month based on their full retirement age benefit. So assuming that they wait till 66 and they start their benefit. Well, in this case, what we're going to assume is Mr. Jones starts his benefit at age 66, his full retirement age. And then because his wife was born before him, I'm sorry, before January 1st, 1954, she has the opportunity to either elect her own Social Security benefit based on her own earnings record, which would be $1,000 a month, or she can file a restricted application and take only her spousal benefit. Her spousal benefit is 50% of what her husband's full retirement benefit would be. So remember, his is $2,000 a month. So she says, I want to restrict taking my own. She's going to take the spousal benefit. 50% of $2,000 is $1,000. So as a married couple, they're now receiving $3,000 per month, just like if she had selected her own benefit. But the cool thing is, because she now has restricted her benefit, she can at age 70 do what we call a switch strategy, where she switches from her spousal only benefit to her own benefit. Her own benefit has been earning those 8% delayed retirement credits, and it's just a really neat option for people that have access to the strategy to really consider. And if you miss it, if you miss out on this, there's no going back. So you want to make sure you get it right the first time. Again, you have to be full retirement age before you can consider those types of decisions. So what I did, now, you know, the government is not looking at your individual life expectancy when they're making decisions on how Social Security works. They're looking at the population and life expectancy across the whole. So if you know that, hey, your parents lived to age 100, your grandparents lived to age 100, you're in excellent health, and it looks like you're going to probably live to age 100, well, you might want to consider delaying taking benefits till later, but we do want to have some idea of what your life expectancy is. On the Sound Retirement Planning website, under the Resources tab, we have a tool available to you. It's a link to the John Hancock Life Expectancy Calculator. It's one of the better life expectancy calculators I've found, but it gives you a starting point for trying to dial in just how long you're going to live so that we can start to make some estimates within Social Security. So in this particular example, what we did was we said, okay, assuming life expectancy for this couple is going to be later, into their 90s, if they were to start their benefit as early as possible, so that means they both start at 62, they'd be looking at about $1 million of lifetime income from the Social Security Administration. If they were to delay that benefit and maximize it over two people's lifetimes, they could end up receiving more like $1.3 million of benefits over Social Security. Now, this is not specific to any of you out there. This is just looking at a hypothetical example because in order for me to give you some guidance on how to know when to start Social Security as part of a retirement cash flow plan, we got to have a foundation to build from. So this is the type of planning that we like to do for our clients before we make a decision about Social Security, just so that we know if we're going to start Social Security early and we live a long time, what are the repercussions? How much money are we going to leave on the table as a result of that decision? Now, obviously, if you get the doctor says you have less than 6 months to live or a year to live, well, that's going to change when you're going to start Social Security. But if we're expecting a long lifetime, Social Security is a valuable benefit. It's inflation-adjusted income. It's currently tax-efficient income. So in a worst-case scenario, only 85 cents of every dollar that you receive from Social Security is taxable to you. And like I said earlier, it has a survivor benefit on there. So depending on when the higher income earner starts their benefit will determine how much the lower Social Security recipient will be eligible for when the higher income earner passes away. So there's a lot of moving parts to Social Security. So it's a great benefit. You want to make sure you're optimizing it. Once we have that information, once we know, and for most people, Social Security is the only guaranteed income they have. Now, if you're going to have a pension, we want to take that into consideration as well. But in this example, what I'm showing is just a real simple spreadsheet that says, okay, in this example, you can see we're going to assume that this gentleman has a small pension that's going to be adjusted for inflation. We're going to delay taking Social Security initially so that we can get more of it later. And you notice that number's going to, the combined Social Security is going to increase over time. This is for the husband and the wife. They've got some cash flow items, some travel, and some purchases they're going to be making. We show how much their monthly income is, and then we show how much their expenses are so that they can get a feel for how much money they're going to have to be pulling out of their portfolio every month in the early years to be able to meet their income needs. Remember, retirement is all about cash flow. It is your income that will determine your lifestyle in retirement, not your net worth. And so some of the stress testing, once you get these basic numbers built into the plan, what you want to be doing is start stress testing some of this. And you can say, okay, if one spouse dies, then we just plug in the numbers and we say, okay, here's what's going to happen to Social Security. Here's what's going to happen to that pension. Here's how much income you're going to have. Do you have enough? Do you need to have life insurance at that point? Maybe, maybe not. We do the same thing with long-term care. We make very conservative assumptions, and we just say, how is this going to work if you need long-term care? We look at sequence of return risk, and we say if the market tanks and right at the time you retire and you're pulling money out of your portfolio, what kind of impact is that going to have? One of the interesting things you might want to be thinking about is stress testing your plan, because the Social Security Trustees report says that, I believe it's the year 2034 was the most recent Trustees report, said that there's going to need to be a 23% reduction in the year 2034. So one of the things you could do once you have these basic numbers outlined for yourself is to just say, okay, if we get to the year 2034 and everybody across the board is going to take a 23% reduction in their Social Security benefit, what would that look like for us? What kind of pressure is that going to put on our retirement assets? Are we going to have enough cash flow? But that's one of the items you want to think about. The other one you want to think about with Social Security is this is especially true for high net worth individuals. Some folks said to me, they said, Jason, we can delay our Social Security. Instead of taking it at 62, we can take it at 70. And sure, we may end up with more income over our life expectancy as a result of doing that. But a lot of that additional income doesn't come till the later years after age 79, 80, somewhere in there. And they said, if we start Social Security early, because we don't really need to depend on it for our retirement cash flow plan, it just gives us more money in the early years when we have our health and we have one another to really go out and be able to do more. So for people that have a lot of assets and they have a lot of really good guaranteed retirement income, the Social Security claiming strategy may be more about what's going to provide the highest quality of life and not necessarily what's going to produce the highest amount of income for you over your lifetime. The flip side to that, though, is sometimes when you start Social Security can be a determining factor in whether or not you've saved enough for retirement or how long that money is going to last. And so as you're creating the retirement cash flow plan, you plug in these different variables and you say, okay, if I started at 62, I'm going to take a 25% reduction. How long are my retirement assets going to last under that scenario? If I wait all the way until 70 and then I'm depleting my retirement assets early, then what does that look like at the bottom line? And remember, that's usually the case. If all you have is Social Security coming in, that may not be enough to cover all of your expenses. And so you might have to be dipping into your retirement savings, which could deplete the inheritance that you end up leaving. So there's just a lot of different factors that go into this. I'd like to be able to simplify it and just give everybody a cookie cutter advice. It's just not that easy. Once you create what I call the year-by-year cash flow plan, then this is where we want to take and we want to start to diversify your money across time. Remember, the stock market has always been a volatile place. That's nothing new. This is what the stock market does. And the fact that we've now been in a 9-year bull market and the market's up 20% since November, and we can have all kinds of negative news come from all over the country with hurricanes and riots and these other countries throwing up missiles over the top of Japan, and I mean there's all kinds of bad news, right? But the market doesn't seem to respond to any of it right now, which is a little bit unusual. But we know that the market has always been a volatile place. And so if we know that time is the cure to the volatility of the stock market, then one idea that generates a lot of confidence for people as they're creating their retirement cash flow plan is to diversify your money across different segments. So in this case, we're showing conservative, moderate, and aggressive. And we're just saying money that you need in the short term, we're assuming a 1%, these are hypothetical rates of return, 4%, 5%, just to be conservative. But we're just saying in the short term, if we're having to pull money out of this account, the last thing we want to do is be pulling money out of an account that's falling in value if we're having to supplement your income, because you probably have heard me say before, it's like being stabbed and going to donate blood at the same time. So the idea is the more time you have, the more risk you can afford to take. So you want to diversify your investments in two ways. First, you diversify the time horizon based on when you're going to need the assets. The more time you have, the more risk you can afford. It's a very simple concept. It's just not easy to do, and it's not easy to create. So unfortunately, that's not what most people do. They just lump all their money together and they don't really have a plan, and that's not what we want for you. We want you to have a really good plan that's taking into consideration all of these different components. The next thing I want to touch on just real briefly is taxes. And we did this analysis a couple of years ago. I should probably update this, but this hypothetical scenario is for David and Karen Anderson. This is a make-believe couple that we created in 2015. And what we did here is we said, okay, in their situation, they said, and actually let me back up a second before we start talking about the specific strategy. I want to take a minute and draw your attention to the usdebtclock.org. This is a website that you guys can all visit and share with your friends. It's kind of interesting, but it shows our national debt, $20 trillion. We've surpassed $20 trillion now. And it also shows that the largest budget items from a spending standpoint. So we've got Medicare and Medicaid, Social Security, defense, income security, interest on our debt, and then federal pensions. So those are the top 6 items where we're spending money. And this is important in part because as we talk about taxes, this is looking at marginal income tax rates. So historically, so you can see back here in 1913, we had these low marginal income tax rates, and then the top tax rates jumped all the way up into the high 70%. And you can see how the top tax rate has bounced around over time. But right now this only goes out to 2013, but right now the top tax rate's only 39.6% in our country, which if you look back historically, that's not a bad top marginal tax rate historically. And there's talk right now, Congress is actually talking about reducing or coming up with a tax reduction strategy. We're not quite sure what that's going to look like, but taxes could actually be going lower in the future depending on what Congress does. And so why that is relevant and important to Social Security comes back to illustration here for David and Karen Anderson. And what this is showing us is, in this scenario, David and Karen Anderson said, hey, if it's possible that taxes could be going up in the future. Now, nobody knows for sure what's going to happen, but if it's possible that taxes could be going up in the future, and we had the ability to take money, our income needs from our retirement accounts from, say, 62 till 70, delay taking our Social Security, switch over to Social Security as being our primary income source at age 70, what would that look like for us? And of course, when we did the analysis, in order to do an apples to apples comparison, we assumed that here's the distributions from the IRA and the small pension that they had. So they need $86,570. We use the personal exemption and the standard deductions, and we keep those constant over this 8-year period of time. And you guys all know that's not what happens with taxes. Those numbers usually adjust every year. But what you can see, assuming that they're taking distributions from their IRAs the first couple of years and only pension income, they have their personal exemption of that year was $7,900, standard deduction $12,400, and their taxable income ends up being $66,270, and their approximate tax is $9,033, giving them an effective tax rate of 10.4%. Now, at the end of 8 years, when they're 70, now they're only taking their required minimum distributions out. That's the money they have to pull out of the retirement accounts. They're taking that pension income has grown with inflation. They've started their Social Security, which remember is tax efficient income. And the provisional income rules say you have to add up all of your income sources plus 50% of your Social Security to determine what percentage of your Social Security is taxable to you. So you notice their total combined Social Security income at that point is $81,000, but the taxable Social Security to them is only $20,341. So it puts them in a position in retirement where they have, from a cash flow standpoint, $101,000 of cash flow, but from a tax return standpoint, only $40,558 of taxable cash flow. And then we apply that same personal exemption, standard deduction, and they end up paying $2,131 in taxes, giving them a 5.3% effective tax rate. So in their case, it actually made more sense, at least in this analysis, was to start those benefits early, delay taking the Social Security and start pulling money out of the retirement accounts. Now, that's not always going to be the best case for everybody, but it is an interesting exercise that's worth looking at if you're trying to figure this out for you. Let's see here. Getting back again to market volatility, right now, this is the CAPE ratio. Many of you know Robert Shiller won the Nobel Prize a couple of years ago. He talks about the cyclically adjusted price to earnings. We're at a time where again, stock prices are just at some of the highest levels historically they've ever been on this price to earnings on a cyclically adjusted basis. At the same time, we've seen interest rates slashed. This is looking at the 10-year Treasury. And so, as interest rates start to go up, if you're a bond holder, you could see the value of your bonds decline if you had to sell those bonds before maturity. And so one of the themes that we're starting to hear people talk about today is what they call the melt up. So many of you are familiar with a melt down, but the idea behind the melt up is because all of this money has been sitting in these what a lot of times people consider bonds to be safer than stocks, but all this money's been allocated to bond mutual funds and bond ETFs and over time. And because the yield has been so depressed on those, what some people are finding is that the yield that they're earning on things like dividend paying stocks is higher than the yield on fixed income. And so we're seeing money maybe shifting or transitioning out of, or we're seeing this as a possibility, money's transitioning out of these fixed income vehicles and into equities because people are chasing yield and they're putting more money at risk. And they're seeing a stock market that just keeps going up and up and up and up. Now, we all know that that's not what the market historically has done. Usually there's some pullbacks, but because of the environment we're in right now, that's just there's kind of been this lull in volatility. And frankly, I think that should be something that you're thinking about and concerned with. There's this concept that we like to talk about in terms of sequence of returns. It's really a powerful one, and I just want to touch on it really briefly, because if you're thinking about retiring right now and you understand that the stocks are expensive and bonds are expensive, you're trying to figure this all out, this really underscores the risk of pulling money out of accounts in a falling environment. So the idea is you've got two brothers. They're both going to need $30,000 a year for income, and they both saved $500,000. One brother retires. Steve, he retires in 1990 with $500,000. Bill retires in 2000, in the year 2000, with $500,000. And so here's Steve's scenario. As you can see, his first year of retirement, he has a negative 4.34%. These are just hypothetical to show you, to illustrate this idea of sequence of return risk. But he's withdrawing $30,000. The balance of his retirement account's down to $449,000. But then he has some really good years here in terms of market performance. And so by 1999, his $500,000, even though he's been taking $30,000 a year out, is now worth $1.2 million. Now, Bill, on the other hand, his brother, he retired in the year 2000, and he had the same $500,000 in his retirement account. But of course, many of you remember the dot-com bubble, 2000, 2001, 2002. Those were some bad years for the market. He's taken his $30,000 out. So he's getting hit with like one of the worst case scenarios, which is pulling money out of an account that's falling in value. And you can see by the time we're just 3 years into the plan that the value's dropped to 292. Then he has a couple of good years here. And then we have the financial crisis of 2008. And so, he's taken money out from 2000 to 2009. Instead of having 1.2 million, he only has $156,000. So it just goes to underscore that if you're pulling money out of an account that's also falling in value, it can really be disruptive to an overall retirement cash flow plan. And it's definitely something you want to be thinking about as you're beginning to retire. One last one other item I wanted to touch on. So most people today, most of their liquid investable money is tied up in retirement accounts, whether it's 401ks or 403bs or these different financial tools where they've saved money on a tax-deferred basis. And what that means is when you turn 70 and a half, you have to begin taking money out of these accounts. And so the purpose of this exercise is just to make some conservative assumptions and say, okay, let's say you had a $300,000 IRA at 67, and we're going to assume a 4% growth rate on that IRA. And then we're going to say we're not going to take any money out of this account during these first couple of years. But when you turn 70, you have to begin taking the distributions out. Your RMD, 27.4 is the divisor. It's about a 3.6% distribution rate. And it says that you're going to have an actual distribution of $12,316. You're going to end up paying total tax that year with all of your other income sources, about $7,500. But the taxes due to the IRA only, just the RMD, is about $3,400. So what we say now is, okay, we pay the taxes out of that distribution, but you don't necessarily need that money to live on. So you take the after-tax amount and you stick it over in a CD at the bank that's also earning 4%. And of course, that's kind of la land today. You can't find a CD paying 4%. But again, this is just to illustrate the point of the exercise, which is now you've got money in a CD. As you all know, that at the end of the year, the bank is going to send you a 1099 for any interest income that you've earned. So you had earnings of $356, which means you're going to have more tax that you have to pay based on the interest income that you've received. And so you just look at the analysis and you say, okay, I have $300,000 today. The account's growing at 4% per year. If you live to age 90, there's still going to be $248,000 in that account at the time you die. If you start taking your RMD at 70 and you only take the distribution, the minimum distribution out over your life expectancy, you're going to end up with $93,000 of taxable distributions out of that account. And then you're going to reinvest that money into a bank CD that's paying 4% interest every year. And over time, that's going to compound and grow. And you're going to pay another $32,000 in taxes there. So on your $300,000 IRA, assuming death, that this is a lump sum taxable distribution at 35%, there's $86,990 taxable distribution on this money. You've paid $93,000 in taxes over your lifetime, and then you've paid another $32,000 in taxes on your interest earnings, which means you paid $213,084 in taxes in this particular hypothetical scenario. Now, that's not to say that this is how it's going to play out for everybody, but a good exercise is if most of your money is tied up in retirement accounts that's never been taxed, and you're looking at the same numbers we are, which is $20 trillion debt, and you're concerned that we could end up seeing taxes go up in the future, but in the short term, we know that tax rates right now are at some of the lowest levels they've been, and it's possible that we could see a tax reduction in the future. There may be an opportunity for you to consider doing things like converting IRAs to Roths to get some of that money out of those tax hostile accounts and start moving them to a tax-free account. So I know I'm giving you just a lot of big picture concepts and ideas that I want to share with you, but things I want you thinking about as you're making this transition into retirement. Remember, you want to create a budget. It's probably the most important number you need to know if you're going to have security in terms of the planning that you're doing for retirement. You want to optimize your Social Security as part of a good retirement cash flow plan. It's going to be the foundation for many of you. It may be the only guaranteed income you have. You want to design a year-by-year cash flow plan and stress test it against inflation, death of one spouse, long-term care, sequence of returns, investment risk, and tax risk. And then once you've done that, then you want to create a structure that helps you diversify your money across time so that as you begin pulling money out of the accounts, you're not taking distributions from accounts that are also falling in value. You're trying to give your money enough time to recover if there is any kind of market risk. We have a meeting process to help people take you through this exact process I've talked about. Now, if you live in our community here, you're welcome to come into my office in Silverdale. But today we're working with a lot of people around the country, and we do virtual meetings. And of course, we like Skype because so many people have that, but there's other ways that we can connect with you online. But we have a 3-meeting process. The first hour is a discovery meeting. The second meeting is 1 hour, and it's plan designed to do that year-by-year cash flow plan and help you understand how to maximize Social Security. And then the third meeting is our implementation, and that is diversifying across time and beginning to create that specific structure for taking those distributions. I highly recommend that you go through this process, whether it's with our firm or somebody else out there that can help you, before you retire. You don't want to be thinking about this and doing it after you've already pulled the trigger. Now, if we're in a position where that's what you have to do because you've already retired, then so be it. But it's always going to be better to have that confidence going into retirement than having to think about it after the fact. I would highly recommend before you hire us, because we charge a fee, we charge a flat fee for creating these plans. Our fees generally range from $500 to $5,000 depending on the complexity of the planning that we're doing. I would say most people pay probably a $1,500 fee. Sometimes that fee is $2,500. Again, just depending on the complexity of the planning that we're doing for you. But the key is that you don't want to hire our firm or anyone else's until you've had at least a quick 15-minute phone conversation, because I can tell you we're not going to be the right person to work with for everybody. So with that, we'll finish up, and if there's any questions, I'll do a quick Q&A here. So hopefully you guys have found that question and answer box, but I know we covered a lot of material in a small amount of time. Hopefully the recording worked, and so we'll make this available for the listeners, but any questions I can answer for you before we finish up today? Yeah, great question. The question is, how many years out should you be? Well, I don't think you can ever start too early to sit down and have somebody that doesn't have an emotional attachment to money give you a second opinion. But to create this really comprehensive plan like we're talking about for specifically retirement cash flow, probably 2 years would be a good time to make sure that plan is dialed in, start making those projections. But I would encourage you to sit down with somebody from a planning perspective as early as possible, just to make sure, just to get a baseline and make sure you're moving in the right direction. Now, we may not be the best firm to help you with there, but I would definitely recommend that you start I think the value of working with a disinterested third party from a planning perspective is they have no emotional attachment. They're going to help you see things in a way that maybe you haven't thought of or seen. And many times it's just because we've helped so many people, financial advisors help so many people along this path. There could just be things that you're not thinking about. But great question. Thanks, David. Any other questions? Okay, guys. Well, I sure appreciate you all being here. Of course, from our website, you can request a complimentary 15-minute phone call, so that if you just want to have a quick Q&A or find out if we're a good fit, I always recommend you do that before you actually hire us. So thank you for being here. Thanks for being listeners to the radio show, the podcast, and I look forward to continuing to connect with you. Be sure to listen to this week's episode on the podcast. I think you're really going to like it. We have a New York Times best-selling author on the show. Okay, until next time, this is Jason Parker signing out. Thank you.